As regards rapier combat, which at present is a very necessary and useful practice, there is no doubt that it is a newly discovered practice with the Germans and brought to us from other people. And since such foreign customs increase with us from day to day in many places, it has now also become more necessary not only that such customs of alien and foreign nations should be familiar and known to us, but that we should practice and adapt ourselves to these customs so that when necessary, we can encounter them to protect ourselves that much more better and be able to triumph.
Even though the rapier was a relatively new weapon in Germany, Meyer believed that it was important for Germans to learn and understand this new style of combat. Knowing the techniques used by swordsmen of other nations would give German swordsmen an advantage when fighting them and make victory more likely. The rapier evolved as a weapon for civilian combat, whether for duels, self-defense on the street, or the popular sport of fencing. The blade of the rapier was about 3.5 feet long, maximizing a swordsman's reach. The blades were also narrow to decrease the total weight of the sword. The hilt evolved from the basic cross hilt found on older swords, adding arms of the hilt to protect the fingers and side rings and various other guards to protect the unarmored hand.
Weapons that Meyer includes in his book is the rapier, and he is really one of the most important Renaissance sources on the rapier. He's got a lot of great material in here, highly detailed, and it's quite interesting that he does this because he says that the rapier is a very new weapon for the Germans. It's a foreign weapon from the Italians. And you can really see that when you look at his illustrations. In many cases, they have a very strong sort of Mediterranean look, a kind of Italian Renaissance scenery is happening behind all of the rapier fencers. For most of Meyer's weapons, they're really sport weapons, but the rapier is something that's actually being used for serious combat in Meyer's day. It's an implement for self-defense, and you can see a bit of that in Meyer's book. Toward the end of his section on the rapier, he gives you instructions as to what to do if you're going to try and fight with a cloak, which a gentleman might just pull off of his back to assist in self-defense. He also gives you instructions on how you might fight against an assailant carrying a larger staff weapon, and gives you some ideas as to how to deal with the disparity in the weapon's length.
One of the greatest differences from longsword combat that Meyer notes is that in rapier combat, the dominant foot is almost always forward. This keeps the rapier between a swordsman and his opponent for more efficient attacks and parries.
There are 7 different guard positions that Meyer mentions, each of which defends different areas of the body. These guards have further divisions to guard the right and left sides of the body, as well as variations that promote thrusting or cutting.
High guard has the hilt held above head level, with the blade angled down towards the opponent's head. This guard protects the head and shoulders, but leaves the lower torso and legs exposed. It is typically used for thrusting attacks, but there is also a variation used for cutting.
Iron Gate covers much more of the body and is a more versatile stance than High Guard, as the hilt is held low with the blade angled up to threaten the opponent's face. The blade can be held to either side of the body. From this guard, most strikes or thrusts can be parried, whether to the head or legs.
Long point is the maximum point of extension of any cut or thrust, with the arm straight and the blade directed at any target on the opponent. There are 4 main types of cuts in Meyer's teaching of rapier combat: vertical, diagonal down, horizontal, and diagonal up. These 4 types each have variations that are aimed at different targets on the opponent.
The vertical cuts are executed directly down from above onto the head or shoulders. Seen here, the swordsman in white attacks from high guard, bringing the blade around from behind his head to strike directly at the head of the swordsman in black. The diagonal attacks follow 3 pairs of lines through the body, from shoulder to armpit, from hip to thigh, and from low thigh to high calf. These cuts can be executed from left to right or right to left, and either downwards or upwards, making this the most variable class of cuts. The swordsman in white executes 2 diagonal down cuts here, slashing through the chest of the swordsman in black. This attack can also be done using 2 diagonal up cuts in the same X pattern. The horizontal cuts also follow 3 lines, through the neck, the belly, and the knee. Here, the swordsman in black attacks with a diagonal upcut, which the swordsman in white parries and then follows with a horizontal cut at neck level. While thrusting attacks were not new to combat in 1570, the concept of a lunge was. In the armored combat of the Middle Ages, a lunge could put a swordsman dangerously off balance. In the rapier fights of Meyer's day, lunges provided a quick, reasonably safe method of attack that could catch an opponent by surprise. The proper technique for lunging, as seen in this demonstration, is to step forward with the dominant foot only, leaning out over the knee, while thrusting to the head or chest with a straight arm, before recovering to guard. Lunges can be executed from any guard and target any part of the body, but in combat to the death, the head or chest is more likely to deliver a lethal hit. As with any weapon, attacking is only half of the battle. Defense is just as important, and Meyer describes several methods of parrying the cuts and lunges just mentioned. Setting off is the first type of parrying and consists of catching an attack on the forward or long edge of the blade and extending the arm into long point to counter with a thrust. The second type of parrying is the hanging parry, with the blade lower than the hilt. This is typically done against low attacks, but attacks at any target can be parried in this manner. Here, the swordsman in white parries a horizontal cut at the neck with a hanging parry and follows through with a high diagonal down cut.
A third type of parrying is called going through. This parry sweeps the blade around to the opposite side of an opponent's sword, before deflecting it to the side and leaving the opponent exposed to a countering cut or thrust.
Drills are an important part of any weapon practice, and in his Lund manuscript of 1568, Meyer left diagrams of some of his drills. These diagrams represent attack combinations that could be practiced alone against a target. Lines represent cuts, while the number indicates the order and direction. Circular dots are also numbered and indicate thrusts, as well as roughly where each thrust should be aimed. In the first drill shown, the initial cut is a high horizontal from the right, followed by a low horizontal cut from the left. This is followed by a middle diagonal upcut and ends with a vertical cut. The second drill incorporates lunges. It starts with 2 horizontal cuts in opposite directions, followed by a vertical cut and a diagonal upcut. The lunge is made against the same shoulder that the diagonal cut went through. The set of techniques known as running in involves closing with an opponent to grappling distance. Many of these techniques are designed to disarm and would have been useful for unarmed self-defense. The first running in technique here counters a vertical cut. The swordsman in white steps forward with his left foot and parries the cut by raising his blade to be nearly horizontal over his head. When the blades connect, the swordsman in white reaches in under his blade to grab the pommel of the swordsman in black with a reversed grip, twisting the arm to the outside and taking the blade. The second technique begins much the same. Once the blades have connected as before, the swordsman in white grabs the entirety of the knuckle guard and twists the arm to the inside. At the same time, he forces his blade in and down, driving the other blade back towards the swordsman in black. In this third technique, the swordsman in white is unarmed. The swordsman in black attacks with a vertical cut, and the swordsman in white jumps backwards to avoid it. He then closes to grappling distance, grabs his opponent by the wrist, and traps the black swordsman's arm against his body. With a reverse grip, he then takes the pommel of the sword and twists it outward, wrenching it out of the grip of the swordsman in black. Meyer also talks about how to use a dagger in the non-dominant hand as a defensive weapon, while wielding a rapier in the dominant hand. This style is effective against an opponent with one blade or 2, and even multiple opponents, as each blade can counter a weapon, though it requires considerable skill to master these techniques. Meyer mentions 3 schools of thought on how to use the dagger. One believed it was better to parry only with the dagger, leaving the rapier free to attack. The second, that whichever side was attacked, the weapon in that hand should be used to parry. And the third, that both weapons should be used to parry attacks. Meyer briefly mentions using a cloak as a defensive tool as well, but strongly discourages use of these techniques. While they can be effective at trapping an opponent's blade, they can just as easily become a distraction to the user, hampering his defense. Meyer recommends that only people well trained in wrapping a cape properly around the arm should attempt this in combat, and even then counsels that these techniques all depend on cloth not being cut by the sword. These techniques require trapping the opponent's blade within the folds of the cape for as long as is needed to make a cut or thrust against them.